What's up, friends, and welcome in to Fantasy Pros. It's the Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Chris Welsh. We got Pat, we got Mick, and we've got wide receiver ranks for you for Week 8. We're going to be going through all the tough questions, wide receivers 1 through 36, flex options outside of it. We got you covered, and hopefully we're going to cover the question that's looming in your mind. But I would remind you, if we don't, there's a couple different ways that you can get hooked up. One of those is going to fantasypros.com/rankings, and you can just literally go through, check out the rankings, and bookmark it, because every single day those things are going to change as more of our 200 plus experts go out and rank these, and we get this ECR, the expert consensus ranks. It's always changing. It's always moving around. So we want you guys to know all the latest and greatest. Plus, we've got a bunch of great offerings. I'll tell you at the end here, of course, where you can check out and get all your questions answered on our live streams. Gentlemen, we are going to do ranks, but first, we are going to talk about a major trade that went down this morning. We all woke up to it, it looked like. This is going to have an effect on wide receivers, so much so that this wide receiver, we'll have to see about playing time and getting out there this week, but this player is going to go from non-relevance to rank relevance to some people, talking about maybe top 15. I don't know about that, but DeAndre Hopkins was traded from the Titans to the Kansas City Chiefs as we record today for a 5th round, and I believe there was a condition of playing time that could move this up to a 4th round. We were talking off air. What's so weird about this was one of those trades to me where it's just people sitting around just being like, that makes sense. Wouldn't that be kind of cool if DeAndre Hopkins? But then, like, when you think about it, you're like, I don't know that they would do this. Why would they do this? Like, I know it like logically makes sense. They need a wide receiver. He's just kind of wasting away over there. But then it happened, and I felt like it was just this drudged up fantasy football community talking about what we'd like to see, and it actually happened. So, Pat, let's start with you. DeAndre Hopkins traded to the Kansas City Chiefs. What does that mean for his fantasy value? And I guess we could go back to it after, but like the effect of Xavier Worthy, where a lot of people are still trying to buy in as him as the one. But really the main question is, where does DeAndre Hopkins' value go from here if he is the number one for the Chiefs?
It goes up. And if you are a DeAndre Hopkins stakeholder, and Lord knows a lot of people have dropped him already, and he's widely available on waivers in a lot of leagues. But if you did hang on to him, this is like found money for you, because he is, I don't know if he's going to wide receiver 15 or that region, Welsh. I think I've got him somewhere in our wide receiver 3 territory now, rest of season. That's kind of a mincing Frady Cat ranking for him. And my weekly ranking for him, also sort of mincing and Frady Cat. I've got him wide receiver 50. I just don't know how much he's going to play. Like the Andy Reid playbook, not an easy one to process. So I would imagine he probably plays limited snaps and has like a package of plays in his first game with the Chiefs. But Patrick Mahomes has not had a credible outside receiver for quite a while. And this is going to be good for him, a guy who we have gotten accustomed to ranking outside of QB1 territory, despite the fact that he might be, is a top 5 passer of all time in the NFL, and we're not ranking him as a QB1. This should help remedy that. I don't know if he is going to be the sort of target hog for Mahomes that Tyreek Hill was a few years ago, but it certainly boosts the value of Hopkins and makes him playable in fantasy leagues once again. And good for DeAndre Hopkins. Like, this guy deserves to play with a contender, and I don't think he's ever played with like an above average quarterback before. So this is a nice change.
One follow-up for you, and then I want to talk to Mick on this. What does this do to Worthy for you? Because I think Worthy's been a pretty big disappointment throughout the year. I think the expectation was Rashee Rice is out. Worthy is going to get more opportunity. That was kind of Now you put Hopkins in. Does Hopkins change the value of Worthy, or is that change more of, let's bring him back to where he was before? Because I think Worthy came up when Rice went down, and then now maybe we bring him back down to that wide receiver thing. What do you think it looks like for Worthy?
So Hopkins arrives, but we might be looking at a multi-week injury for Juju Smith-Schuster. It was a pretty bad sign that he was declared out for week 8 very early in the week. That makes me think he's week to week and could maybe miss like up to a month. So maybe that just kind of holds this unsteady value for Worthy. As it is, he's a very hit or miss flex type player. And I think he kind of stays that, but once Juju comes back, I don't know if you could even feel comfortable flexing him.
All right, Mick. So this is a tough one because what the value looks like of DeAndre Hopkins this week feels pretty minimal. Do you think people should be tempted to put him in lineups this week? And what do you think the upside of Hopkins will ultimately look like, let's say 2 weeks from now as a Kansas City Chief?
Yeah, this week I probably would steer clear. I have him ranked, outside the top 50 currently, maybe bump him up a couple of spots, but I just don't think the volume is going to be there. As Pat mentioned, learning the playbook from Andy Reid. I don't think that there's going to be a ton of volume for Hopkins in this game. So for that reason, I'm probably not going to be starting him this week. But going forward, listen, we're talking about a guy who was the wide receiver 22 in total scoring last year, 29 in points per game. And that was with Will Levis and Ryan Tannehill. So I think that there's a very good chance that Hopkins is a top 20, 25 receiver going forward. Again, not starting him this week probably, but I think going forward is a lot to be optimistic about.
There you go. If you guys happen to be in that situation. Oh, I remember I had one more I wanted to ask Mick. Let's say waivers ran tomorrow. Who would you rather have, DeAndre Hopkins or Juaun Jennings?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'm going to go with Hopkins. Debo is still there. I mean, obviously he has the situation with pneumonia, so his status for this week is a little bit unclear. But I think going forward, the 49ers have a bye next week. So coming out of the bye, you're probably going to have Debo back. You're probably going to have McCaffrey back as long as Kittle doesn't have a setback. I think Jennings is still going to be probably the fourth option in that offense, whereas Hopkins could be the second or third option. So I think I'm going to go Hopkins there. My
only pushback to that, Pat, is that the 49ers ran out 2 top 20 wide receivers when it was Ayuk and Debo. You've seen Juaun Jennings, when one of those guys is out, he performs like Debo or Ayuk. So if those are gone now, Juaun Jennings, I personally don't see why Juaun Jennings can't just step into the Ayuk role, which in turn would make him around a top 20, which is higher than what we're talking about with DeAndre Hopkins. A little bit of homer, 49er helmets behind me and blah, blah, blah. I get that. But Juaun Jennings, DeAndre Hopkins, waivers run right now. Where's your money going?
Well, I was hoping you were just going to ask Mick and leave it at that, because this is a really... Actually, Welsh, I was sort of facing this dilemma because I'm in a league where waivers run on Wednesday night, and I'm in this league with a partner. And my partner and I had put in a pretty zesty bid on Juaun Jennings for this week because we are kind of up against it with our wide receiver depth. And, he texted me this morning, like, should we switch that over to DeAndre Hopkins? And we ultimately decided against it. We put in a contingency bid on Hopkins for like $1 less than our hefty bid on Juaun Jennings.
I love doing that.
So we are very close on that one. But I think just the fact that Jennings is already established in that offense, we saw him have a smash game before when the 49ers were missing a receiver, that 11 catch, 175 yard, 2 touchdown game when the 49ers were missing Debo earlier this year. So just felt a little more comfortable with him, but it was a close call.
And that's the type of range you're probably looking at. So Juaun Jennings versus DeAndre Hopkins, we'll talk about it. But the key point for you guys when you're paying attention to week 8, Hopkins is probably not going to be a starter. I know many people are going to want to ask this question throughout the week. It's just probably too hard to predict. You could maybe point to Amari Cooper and what Amari Cooper was able to do in the week 1 without really knowing the offense. And that's a possibility. But we know, Mahomes likes to move the ball around to lots of different pieces, and this just might not be the spot. But there you go. There's DeAndre Hopkins for you in that big trade. Tons of trades early on, and that affecting the wide receivers. So speaking of those wide receivers, let's get to it. These are the top 12 going into week 8, according to FantasyPros ECR. Number 1, Justin Jefferson on the big board. Jamar Chase, kind of pretty status quo with those top 2. A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London coming in as a top 5. We've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Jaden Reed, Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, and DJ Moore. These are all very set it and forget it. Not a ton to really break through. I mean, it's fun to see Drake London so high and everything like that. The one thing I will ask you guys about, I got burned by feeling positive that Cooper Kupp was going to come in. The stupid thing I didn't do last week was remember that they had a Thursday game. So why would they play him on Sunday? And it didn't make sense. So that kind of hurt me for last week. They say he's good to go. They announced it really quick. There's also just a lot of trade rumors that doesn't really have an effect. It just seems like there's a lot of Cooper Kupp stuff that's floating out there. The most important of the stuff is that he's playing. He comes in at ECR 10. He's actually moved down 2 spots over the last 24 hours. You guys both have him as a wide receiver 1. Pat, Cooper Kupp, over under 11.5 targets in this game.
I'll go over on that. And that's the reason for the high ranking. And so I don't want to speak for Mick here, and maybe Mick can add to this, but like, I don't think either of us rank him as a top 10 guy thinking that Puka Nacua is going to be back this week, even though Puka did return to practice, but I think it's probably still another week away for the Puka Nacua return. If Kupp plays and Puka does not, you would have to imagine that Kupp is going to be heavily targeted, and heavily targeted for Cooper Kupp often means something in the 15 to 20 target range. So that's why he's a top 10 guy for me.
Mick, same thing with Cooper Kupp. Let me now move it. Let's go 12.5 targets over under.
I think I'm going to go under, but that's probably right in that range, 10 to 15. So yeah, somewhere in that range. But I think in general, you're going to start Kupp, but I do think that, the matchup is not ideal. Minnesota ranks first in DVOA against the pass. So granted, Los Angeles is probably going to be playing from behind and needing some volume, but I just don't know if we're going to see, a 20 target game. Again, it might be more in that 10 to 12 range. So I'm going to start Kupp, but I think I'm going to have him in that low wide receiver 1 range this week.
But it's comfortable. Like, we have to get him back in. That's a big, I guess the other thing would be is like, we don't have to really ask questions about Cooper Kupp this week. He's healthy, whatever that is, I guess, suppose for him, but he's active. And I think that's like the big key that we can all just like write home about, and we're comfortable. And you're comfortable, clearly, right?
Absolutely.
Boom. By the way, the props out there, it's quite a bit lower than mine was targets, but 6.5 receptions is also what you're seeing across the board. And give a shout out, as you can see on my hat, if you're watching on the YouTube, Betting Pros. We've got a great offer on Betting Pros for Fantasy Pros people. You guys can go and get 1 month of the premium access to Betting Pros. If you go use the code FP3, go and download the app today. Use that code and get access to all of our awesome tools on Betting Pros. And guess what? You can go and put in a Cooper Kupp bet. You can use that fantasy knowledge, put it into some props, have some fun, check out what the receptions, the touchdown scoring is, whatever it is. Let Fantasy Pros help you out with same game parlay builders, price pick builders. Go and check it out today and use that promo code for a full month of premium access to the Betting Pros stuff, FP free. I say stuff lovingly because it's like amazing, all of the things that are in there. All right, let's go and talk about our wide receiver 2s. Our wide receivers 13 through 24. I was looking at the other one. T. Higgins coming in this week on ECR at 13. Zay Flowers, Davante Adams, Brian Thomas, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin. We've got Amari Cooper at 20. DeVonta Smith, after that performance, still in the top 24. We've got Jaylen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, and Marvin Harrison Jr. So let's start with Davante Adams here. He comes in at 15. Mick, you've got him at 15. Pat, you've got him at 19. Pat, why do you hate Davante Adams?
Yeah, I've got Adams and Garrett Wilson as ranking twins. Wide receiver 19 for Adams, wide receiver 20 for Wilson. I don't know if I'm going to have both guys ranked as mid-range wide receiver 2s the rest of the season. Maybe the targets start to break more heavily toward one or the other henceforth. But last week they had 9 targets apiece. And until we have more data to work with, I'm probably just going to continue to have these guys as twinsies in the
Where
rank.
did you say you had Garrett?
20, right behind.
See, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm still kind of team Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson might still just be the guy to rank above, but I think you might be onto something that they're just eating into each other just enough that they maybe don't belong in the top 15. But I know that's kind of just like this open debate. Mick, same thing with you. Your comfortability with Davante Adams, you've got him ranked higher. And then I'd be curious at Davante versus Garrett Wilson in your ranks.
I do have Davante higher. I don't know that is the right option. I think I'm kind of where Pat is at, where, if you have one ranked above the other, I wouldn't really fight you either way. But I do like Adams this week. New England is 30th in DVOA against the pass. And, I'm a Jets fan. I know the Jets ran away from the Patriots, in week 3, but I don't necessarily think that's going to happen this week the way they've been playing. So I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about them taking the air out of the ball. I think Adams and Wilson will both be fine this week, but I do have Adams a little bit higher. We could see a situation where I don't think Christian Gonzalez is going to play man up on either one of them. I think he can rotate. So I think both guys are viable this week.
A lot of stinker performances last week from wide receivers. 0 catch, 1 catch, negative yards. One of the most just in-your-face ones was DeVonta Smith. And DeVonta Smith, not going to that's probably his worst game of the season. I think that's relatively fair to say. Definitely not a guy that's like this huge sell. I think if anything, there was a buy opportunity for that. Going up against Cincinnati this week, he's got an ECR of 21. Mick, you've got him at 23. Pat, you've got him at 17. So you're quite a bit higher. So Pat, let's jump to you on this one. Are you back in on DeVonta Smith? And especially sometimes you'll see these like really talented players that have these absolutely embarrassing, disgusting games, and teams will try to, right out the gates, just try to rectify that, get him a lot of targets. So you're just jumping right back into it. Do you think it's something like that was more of an anomaly than anything else, and this is a great week for Smith?
A complete anomaly, Welsh. 1 catch for -2 yards in a 28-3 Eagles win in which Jalen Hurts had to throw 14 passes because it was just that kind of a game script. In his previous 4 games, DeVonta Smith had given us at least 64 yards of receiving in every game, 7 catches in each of his first 3 games this season. He's a terrific player. One of the best route runners in the NFL, and the matchup against the Bengals is like somewhere between neutral and good. Start DeVonta Smith this week.
Mick, DeVonta Smith or Amari Cooper this week for you?
I currently have Smith 1 spot ahead of Cooper. So again, I think this is a situation where I wouldn't fight you too hard if you wanted to go Cooper over Smith, but I do prefer Smith slightly over Cooper.
And then what's your take on DeVonta Smith for this matchup this week? This is a pretty decent matchup, I think, coming back to it's a 3-star matchup. He's actually, I've mentioned this, we have the ratings as far as what this matchup is for players. He is the first of the going from A to B graded ratings. He's a B+ rating. So the guy right above him, which was Amari Cooper, by the way, was given an A-. He gets that B+. What do you think about this matchup? And do you think they're going to litter him with targets this week?
I don't know about littering, and I think that's the concern I have is that, he only got 2 targets last week, which was discussed with the blowout situation, but he also only had 4 the week before, and I think there's a little bit of a carryover there with A.J. Brown returning last week, or the week before, I should say. So 6 targets in 2 games with Brown back in the fold. I don't expect that little volume going forward. I think there will be an uptick, but I don't know if he's going to be in that 10 to 12 target range. Might be more in that 6 to 8 range, which again is viable, and the matchup is good. Cincinnati should put up points against the Eagles, which will force Philly to throw the ball a lot more than 14 times. So I'm comfortable starting Smith, but I just don't have him in that wide receiver 1 range.
Marvin Harrison went from this beloved pick to you just get him in the lineup, look at the opportunities. He's moved down to ECR 24. You both have him lower. You do not have him in the wide receiver 2 range, which officially opens up this window of like, you know what? I'm willing to just take shots on other players, and you can look at volume. There's a couple of players that are rattling around in my head that I might throw at you guys, but ECR 24, Mick, you've got him at 26. Pat's got him at 28, but Mick, let's start with you. The separation isn't great. The connection isn't great. Everyone made a big deal about the double move that Harrison made, that he was wide open, but he doesn't talk about how he got hit right in the numbers and dropped the ball. Like, that's kind of a consistency with him. The targets, they're nothing monstrous. They're nothing Malik Neighbors-ish. So your sentiment, obviously this week, is quite a bit lower on Marvin Harrison. I mean, 27 wide receivers or 25 wide receivers you're starting over him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on your other options. I don't necessarily hate the idea of starting Marvin Harrison this week, but it's just one of those things where the matchup is not great. I mean, Miami is kind of a run funnel defensively. So, you mentioned that Harrison's not getting the target volume that some of these guys in the wide receiver 1 range and even wide receiver 2 range are getting. So I think that's the concern, is that the volume is not necessarily going to be there. And, if Miami can put up points, then perhaps there's a little bit of shootout appeal there, but I just don't know how bankable that's going to be in this matchup. So depending on your other options, I don't necessarily mind fading him this week.
Pat, what are you doing with Marvin Harrison right now? He is definitely falling out of favor for a lot of people, and especially a lot of fantasy owners. And what say you?
Unfortunately, I think he's going to be a difficult start-sit decision for a lot of people this week. So I've got him at wide receiver 28. He's averaging 6.1 targets a game, which is just so confounding considering that the Cardinals had this screaming need for a high-volume wide receiver coming into this year, and you would have thought he would have been this target hog for him, and that has not happened yet, and we're not even seeing the targets trend up for Marvin Harrison. Plus, Marvin Harrison might see quite a bit of Jaylen Ramsey in this matchup. And as Mick mentioned, the Dolphins have been kind of a run funnel. Maybe that changes a little bit with Tua back, and the Miami offense might pressure opponents to throw more if Miami starts moving the ball more and scoring more points. But yeah, I'm treading lightly here. By no means do I think he is a slam dunk start.
One price check kind of thing I wanted to do. I just want to point out how nice it feels to look and see the Jaylen, Waddle, and Tyreek Hill ranks again this week. Tyreek back in the top 10, Waddle in the mid 20 range. Tua is expected to be back. Just quickly, since we didn't have this on the sheet, Pat, are you kind of full go that with Tua back, this offense is going to have its legs again, and Waddle can be that wide receiver too, and Tyreek is back to top? Like, all is right, I guess, is what I'm asking. And there's really no question to starting these Dolphins again.
Mostly, yes. I've got Hill, wide receiver 7, and Jaylen Waddle, wide receiver 25. So that's lower than I had both guys in my preseason draft rankings. Maybe a little bit of a rust price reduction here for these guys. But otherwise, I'm still feeling pretty good about starting both.
Mick, same thing for you. Is this just wheels back up for all the Dolphins? Do you have any Pat has a little bit of hesitation. Do you have any hesitation?
Not with Hill. I think there should be a little bit of concern with Waddle just from a volume standpoint, but I think I have Waddle at 27. So if you're playing 3 wide receivers, I'm starting Waddle. And even if you're starting 2, he's probably a flex. So I don't mind starting him either, but definitely Hill for sure.
Kind of think, I don't know. I mean, this is just me. I kind of feel like Waddle might even have a little bit more upside than we're giving, because I think, Tyreek is definitely living off of that big play stuff. Waddle is a very big safety net for Tua. So I think, I don't know, I'm probably going to be a little bit higher than on Waddle than you guys are this week, but you guys can check all of that out over on FantasyPros/rankings if you want to check it. All right, let's do the wide receivers 25 through 36. Coming in at 25, we've got Tank Dell. We've got Juaun Jennings, Darnell Mooney, Xavier Worthy, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison. At 30, we've got Romeo Doubs, Lad McConkey, Keenan Allen, Khalil Shakir, Tyler Lockett, and Cortland Sutton at 36. Let's talk about the Buffalo situation. Khalil Shakir at 32, Mick at 34, Pat at 39 out on Shakir. So Pat, what's is the up? Really, I would say the upcoming of Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper coming in. Do you think that is going to mitigate Khalil Shakir's fantasy moving forward?
Could be. I like the player a lot, but the Bills have Amari Cooper now, and we've seen that Keon Coleman is still going to remain involved. They have Dalton Kincaid, and we know that Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator, really likes to run the ball. The Bills are running at the 8th highest rate in the league right now, and I don't think this is a great individual matchup either for Khalil Shakir. He lines up in the slot about 70% of the time, and when he does line up in the slot this week, he's probably going to be running into the coverage of Seattle cornerback Devon Witherspoon, outstanding second-year player, more often than not. So, yeah, I don't think this is a great week to start Shakir.
Mick, same thing on Khalil Shakir. You are a little bit higher. I mean, you do have him as a wide receiver 3, but how are these 3 wide receivers, Cooper, Keon Coleman, and Shakir, going to all just kind of work together and be able to be fantasy relevant?
I think Cooper is probably going to be the most consistent and the bill you'd want to start more often than not. Shakir is going to be more efficient than Coleman. Coleman is high upside, but also high risk at times. Shakir is just so efficient. He has 27 receptions on 28 targets. If we knew for sure that he was getting, X amount of targets in a given week, I think he'd be a top, 25 potential wide receiver. But, with Cooper in the fold and Coleman emerging, I just don't know if the volume is going to be there to make him a no-brainer start, but I think in certain matchups, he's definitely viable.
One that's a little off sheet here that I wanted to ask you guys about that I think it's important. We've talked about Juaun Jennings. Juaun Jennings comes in at 26 on this list. I would love to get this is Juaun Jennings if healthy and active, and this is Ricky Pearsall if Jennings is out. Mick, can I probe you for is Jennings 26 or higher for you if he is active? And then if he is not, I'm assuming Ricky Pearsall is going to be the guy that moves up. What would that look like?
I currently have Jennings 29th, I believe, but that was also kind of with Debo in the mix. If Debo's out, Jennings probably bumps into that top 24 range for me. If Jennings is out, I don't know if I can get there with Pearsall as far as a wide receiver 2 in 12-team leagues, but I certainly think that wide receiver 3 is in that range. So I think he should be in that 25 to 36 range if Debo and Jennings are out this week.
Pat, I'm assuming, by the way, I should say this, I'm assuming Debo's out. He had pneumonia, couldn't breathe properly. So I'm going to assume they're going to play it easy, let him rest. You've also got the bye week coming up. Obviously, it's an important game. So same thing. Jennings, when I say it's without Debo, Jennings rank. And then if Jennings is out, what do the beneficiaries in the wide receiver core for the 49ers look like?
I, too, am playing it as if Debo is going to be out. Hard to imagine him coming back after, missing a game with pneumonia. So I've got Jennings, wide receiver 27 right now. If he is out, I would probably move Ricky Pearsall into I don't know if I can get higher than wide receiver 42. Well, looking at my rankings, I don't know if I can put him past Dontavian Wicks, who right now I think is my wide receiver 43. So I'd probably have him right behind Wicks at 44. If Debo, if we don't see Jennings, it might be sort of an ad hoc situation, a wide receiver, more so than just Pearsall being a target hog. We might get Ronnie Bell, Jacob Cowing, Ricky Pearsall. However, if George Kittle misses this game and he's got a sprained foot, and it's possible he doesn't play with the 49ers having a bye next week, then I would have to consider moving up Ricky Pearsall into wide receiver 3 range. A lot of moving parts right now with the San Francisco pass catchers.
There's going to be a lot of San Francisco 49er questions for people. So make sure you're tuned in to the live streams. We got one Thursday. We've got the Sunday morning stuff. Make sure you guys are tuned in because it's going to be crazy. The 49ers at this point, they're looking at activating Pat Fitzmaurice to the active roster with the amount of wide receivers they have. It's not great. A couple more wide receivers to talk about in the 3 range. Romeo Doubs. This is another harkening back to the buy sell trade show. I've kind of put Romeo Doubs as a player to sell if you're kind of a mover and shaker in the trade market, simply because he's coming off of a huge game. He has had 2 big weeks of targets after crying about his playing time and going home, taking his ball and going home. He's back. He's getting targets, but there are so many players in this offense that I think makes it difficult to be there's this one guy that's going to get massive amounts of targets. And Jaden Reed, they use in a lot of different spaces. So I'm leaning this all to say Dobbs comes in at 34. Mick, you've got him at 40. Pat has him at 33. So there's a difference here. Mick, I want to start with you on the negative about Romeo Doubs. At 40, based off the last 2 weeks, that kind of seems kind of nuts. But with what I said, they just move a lot of different pieces, and he does get a lot of first read looks, but they got 4 capable wide receivers and a tight end. So what made you put Dobbs at 40 off of that big target week he just had?
That's exactly what it was. And it's a little bit nerve-wracking considering they're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the worst pass defense in the NFL. So this could certainly come back to bite me. But as you mentioned, there are so many other options in that offense between Reed and Wicks and Watson and Kraft that I just don't know if Dobbs is going to be the guy. I mean, he got 10 targets, I believe, last week. But even the week before when he scored 2 touchdowns, I think he only had 4 targets. So I think, from that standpoint, Reed is the one that I'm most comfortable with. The other guys, it could be Doubs, it could be Wicks, it could be Watson. I just don't know. So I think, the matchup could favor all three of these guys, but I'm okay if one of them beats me this week.
Pat, same thing. You are a bit higher. This is, your team. You watch them probably more than anybody. Doubs is a first read guy. What say you about him in this matchup? Can he make it 3 straight weeks of like really good fantasy relevance?
Maybe. We have seen Doubs kind of get the squeaky wheel treatment to some extent the last couple of weeks. 14 targets in his last 2 games, 11 catches, 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. It is always hard to tell how the target distribution is going to work for the Green Bay wide receivers because they go like 5 deep. Even Bo Melton, their number 5, is pretty good. But the Jaguars, this is an oxygen-rich environment for the Green Bay passing game. I would say with the Jaguars pass defense, as Mick noted, they're giving up 33.5 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So it's possible Doubs could be the odd man out this week. Last week, Christian Watson was the odd man out. You just kind of never know. Someone is usually going to disappoint from this wide receiver group. It's usually not Jaden Reed, but someone from Wicks.
It's usually
Watson.
It's usually
Doubs.
Watson, usually not Reed. And then there's this little mixture in between of Wicks and Doubs.
It is. The good thing for Doubs, though, like his snap count has been pretty steady. And last week we saw the snap sort of chopped up between Watson and Wicks. So like Doubs and Reed have kind of established themselves as the top 2 guys here. And then it's maybe Wicks and Watson behind them. So usage should be pretty good and a really good matchup. I think he's like a compelling wide receiver 3 or flex play.
Speaking of wide receiver 3, can a single Indianapolis Colt wide receiver be a wide receiver 3 this week? What do you do? Anthony Richardson is not a friend of wide receivers. Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce. Pat, do one of these players make it as a wide receiver 3? And is one even a flex this week?
I have Michael Pittman just outside the door, banging on the door of wide receiver 3 status, wide receiver 37. Look, I am an Anthony Richardson believer, but we have to acknowledge that he has a long way to go as an NFL passer, and the outlook for Colts pass catchers dims considerably with Richardson at quarterback versus Joe Flacco. I still think Pittman is the lead receiver for Indy. I don't think Josh Downs or Alec Pierce are playable. I know a lot of people want Josh Downs to become a thing for fantasy. I don't think it can happen with Richardson at quarterback.
Mick, same question. Is there a Colts wide receiver that is even in the top 3, and is one even a flex?
I mean, I think one of them is going to be a wide receiver 3, but deciding which one is going to be the issue. I too have Pittman slightly higher than Downs. I have Pittman at wide receiver 37 and Downs at wide receiver 44. But as Pat mentioned, I mean, with Richardson at quarterback, it's kind of a tough sell for either one of those guys to be a surefire starter, regardless of the matchup at this point. I think Pittman had 3 catches for 63 yards last week and was still the wide receiver 31. Welsh, you mentioned how many wide receivers disappointed last week, but I don't think that's going to get, him into the wide receiver 3 territory more often than not. But I do think those guys are a step above Alec Pierce. I just don't see Pierce as viable. I mean, he's a guy who's either going to catch a bomb or Richardson's going to overthrow it by 8 yards and he's going to throw up a 0. So I have no interest in starting Pierce. I think Pittman and Downs are the ones that are the most viable, and I lean Pittman a little bit over Downs.
Alec Pierce is like the Christian Watson of that offense. It's like 2 targets will be awesome, but he could put up 0s, Pat.
Now that Mick said it, he's going to have like an 80-yard touchdown catch and a 60-yard touchdown catch.
Lock it up. Longest reception, Alec Pierce. Go and do that today. Lots of big questions on the wideouts. Don't forget, though, we can answer them because we've got a weekly start and sit live stream on our YouTube channel where you can come and ask your start and sit questions. Maybe it's about the Colts, it's the Packers, or whoever. We'll be with you every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And for those on the podcast, youtube.com/fantasypros. If you subscribe and put on notifications, you will know exactly when we're live. And there's a nice little schedule tab showing you when these shows are going to be live if you can't keep up with all the great schedule for your Week 8 ranks.